For over 1,000 years, Islam expanded through war, conquest, and forced submission. Those who resisted faced the sword. Dissent was crushed, history rewritten, and questioning the faith meant death. For centuries, Islam maintained its power by controlling the narrative. But then, something happened. Something the early caliphs never saw coming. The internet shattered Islam's monopoly on information. Suddenly, anyone could access history, analyze the Quran, and expose contradictions that were once hidden. The truth, suppressed for centuries, is now available to everyone with a smartphone. And now, Islam faces a crisis it cannot fight with swords or threats. This is the story of how Islam spread by force, and how in the age of the internet, it is beginning to fall apart. From its very beginnings, Islam was not spread through peaceful preaching alone. It was enforced through conquest, taxation, and suppression. Muhammad himself was not just a religious leader, but a military commander. After fleeing to Medina, he launched raids, waged war against opposing tribes, and used force to establish his rule. Within a century of his death, Islamic armies had conquered vast territories stretching from North Africa to Persia. These weren't voluntary conversions. Nations were taken by the sword, and their people were given three options: convert, pay the jizya tax, or die. The rapid expansion of the early caliphates, Umayyad, Abbasid, and Ottoman, was fueled by military dominance. Islam's survival depended on political and military power, not on the strength of its theological arguments. Unlike Christianity, which spread through evangelism and martyrdom, Islam advanced by overpowering civilizations and then controlling them. One of the key tools of this control was the jizya, a heavy tax imposed on non-Muslims. Those who refused to convert were forced to pay this tax in humiliating conditions, often in exchange for protection that could be revoked at any time. Many converted simply to escape oppression. Others were enslaved, exiled, or executed. The so-called Golden Age of Islam wasn't built on voluntary faith, but on submission, often under duress. But military conquest alone wasn't enough. Islam also had to control the narrative. To ensure its dominance, it used blasphemy laws, apostasy punishments, and historical revisionism to silence dissent. Questioning Muhammad or the Quran was met with execution or exile. Any competing ideologies, whether Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian, or Hindu, were suppressed, their scriptures destroyed or rewritten through an Islamic lens. Islamic rulers actively rewrote history to portray Islam as tolerant and peaceful. Islamic scholars crafted hadiths that justified their rule, promoted conquest as divine duty, and removed any unflattering details about Muhammad's life. Early sources were carefully selected and censored to ensure Islam's image remained untouchable. This is why most of what we know about Muhammad comes from Islamic texts written over 200 years after his death by scholars who had every reason to glorify him. For centuries, this system worked. People had no access to competing ideas, no way to fact-check Islamic claims, and no option but to submit. The only history they knew was the one written by their rulers. Islam's expansion relied on swords, censorship, and fear. Muslims are told that Muhammad was the most honorable man who ever lived, but Islam's own sources paint a very different picture. Muslims defend Muhammad's marriage to Aisha, claiming it was normal for the time. But even in his own era, marrying and consummating a relationship with a 9-year-old child was disturbing. Sahih Bukhari, 5133. The Prophet married Aisha when she was 6 years old and consummated the marriage when she was 9. Sahih Muslim, 3481. Aisha said, "The Messenger of Allah married me when I was 6 years old and consummated the marriage when I was 9. The fact that this is recorded in Islam's most authentic sources means Muslims can't deny it. Instead, they try to justify it by saying it was normal at the time. But in reality, many other men of that era waited until puberty before consummating marriage. What kind of prophet claims to be the moral standard of humanity and then sleeps with a 9-year-old girl? Muhammad allowed the rape of female captives. Islamic scholars admit that sex with captured women was allowed. The Quran itself commands this. Quran 4 verse 24, "And forbidden to you are married women, except those your right hands possess." This means Muslim men were permitted to have sex with female captives, even if they were already married. The hadith confirm this was practiced. Sahih Muslim 3371. "We took female captives and we desired them, but we also wanted ransom. So we asked the Prophet about coitus interruptus. He said, 'Do it if you like, but what is decreed will happen.'" This shows that the companions of Muhammad took women as sex slaves after raids and battles. Instead of condemning it, Muhammad approved. Would a real prophet allow his followers to rape women? Islam teaches that Muhammad was merciful, but history shows that he couldn't tolerate criticism. He had those who mocked or questioned him murdered. Ka'b bin al-Ashraf, a poet who mocked Muhammad. Muhammad ordered his followers to assassinate him. Ibn Ishaq 551. Asma bint Marwan, a woman who wrote poetry criticizing Muhammad. Muhammad's followers killed her in her sleep. Ibn Ishaq 819. Muhammad's response to criticism wasn't debate or forgiveness, it was murder. Muslims often claim that Islam honors women, but the Quran permits wife-beating. Quran 4:34. "As for those women on whose part you fear disobedience, admonish them, forsake them in bed, and strike them." Muhammad himself set the example. Sahih Muslim 2127. Aisha said, "The Messenger of Allah struck me on the chest, which caused me pain. Why would God send a prophet who physically abuses his wife?" Muslims claim that the Quran is perfect and unchanged, but the text is full of contradictions. Who was the first Muslim? Quran 6:14. Muhammad is the first Muslim. Quran 7:143. Moses is the first Muslim. Both can't be true. If the Quran is flawless, why does it contradict itself? Will Christians go to heaven? Quran 2:62. Righteous Jews and Christians will enter paradise. Quran 3:85. Only Islam is accepted by Allah. Which one is true? Do we have free will? Quran 81:27-28. Humans have the choice to follow God. Quran 7:178. Allah chooses who will be guided and who will be deceived. Again, these are direct contradictions. If the Quran is divine, why does it contain basic logical errors? Muslims claim the Quran contains scientific miracles. In reality, it is full of scientific errors. Semen comes from the backbone. Quran 86:6-7. Man is created from a fluid that is emitted from between the backbone and the ribs. This is completely wrong. Semen is produced in the testes, not the backbone. The sun sets in a muddy spring. Quran 18:86. Until when he reached the setting of the sun, he found it setting in a muddy spring. The sun does not set in a muddy spring. This is an ancient myth, not a miracle. These are not scientific miracles. They are scientific mistakes. For the first time in history, ordinary Muslims could access real history, authentic Islamic sources, and critical analysis of the Quran and Hadith. The things Islamic scholars kept hidden, Muhammad's violent conquests, contradictions in the Quran, scientific errors, are now available to anyone with a smartphone. This is why Islam is falling apart. It was never based on truth. It was based on control. The moment people are free to ask questions, read historical sources, and think critically, Islam cannot survive. This is exactly what we're seeing today. Apostasy rates are skyrocketing in Muslim-majority countries. In Iran, over 50% of the population has left Islam. In Saudi Arabia, underground ex-Muslim communities are growing. In the West, former Muslims are publicly exposing Islam's flaws, and their voices are getting louder. Islam was built by the sword, but it is dying by the internet. Islam is in crisis. Its leaders are desperate to silence critics, ban books, and restrict internet access. But it's too late. Once a person sees the truth, they can never unsee it. The fall of Islam won't happen overnight, but its foundations are crumbling. The next generation will not be controlled like their ancestors were, and that is why Islam is doomed. If you know someone who is questioning Islam, send them this video. The more people learn the truth, the faster Islam collapses. Like, share and subscribe for more content exposing the lies of Islam and revealing the truth. The truth will always win.